Well, my personal experience was I had to do baseline testing to protect my dairy business, and it was rather interesting that I had never gotten involved in any environmental campaigns or questions even prior to this, but thought I was doing baseline testing, and they were flaring a well on the other side of the farm the day they came to do the baseline at my farm. And when the test results came back, there were some very bad things in it. We had benzene, we had toluene, we had the BTEX constituents, which you would expect from any hydrocarbon operation. But what was interesting was we also had extraordinarily high levels of carbon disulfide. And carbon disulfide is an interesting compound because very few things produce high levels of carbon disulfide. Rayon plants produce it, but there isn't a rayon plant in North Texas. And so what I saw in the testing results at my own home were, and this was verified by the Environmental Protection Agency, not by Deborah, the scientists there told me, you have carbon disulfide levels that are 300 times what's normal for ambient urban air. And nobody had ever done an environmental impact study in North Texas on the wells. And they had allowed, at that point in time, they had allowed about 13,000 wells to be drilled. And they had no clue what was coming out of them or what the impact was to the local environment. And so I was concerned about that, obviously, because I live 600 feet from these wells, and so do all my neighbors for that matter. I mean, we all live within half a mile. We needed testing to be done, and because of my, I guess you would say, activism on that, both TCEQ and EPA began doing testing in North Texas on the wells, and what they found was a bit concerning. And I'm quoting here, I'm going to get it just about right, but TCEQ, which is our environmental regulatory body here in Texas, stated that gas wells can and sometimes do emit compounds at levels that can be deemed unsafe. Well, they found some very high levels of like benzene, so high coming out of some pad sites that it would be the equivalent of you holding a gas can right under your nose and just breathing. And so how does that impact the people who live around these sites? And I think that that's very concerning. And what's interesting to me is that you can look at air tests from not just North Texas, but you can look at it from the Bakken, you can look at it from the Marcellus, you could probably look at air tests from Poland. They're always the same. You always see these same compounds because it's coming from the operations themselves in the formation. So the people are being impacted, your air quality is being impacted. Then you have the aquifer depletion. I don't know a lot about that because it's not the work that I do. My work has all been on the numbers of it. But certainly there's aquifer depletion. There's problems with water. And the argument that I hear the most, which always irritates me the most when I speak on panels with industry executives, is they state, well, we don't use any more water than a golf course. Well, you can argue the merits of watering golf courses if you're like me, because I don't like golf. But golf courses, at least when you use that tremendous amount of water, it's trickling down through the soil and it's recharging the aquifer. That's not the case with shale wells or any oil and gas well for that matter. The water that they use is so contaminated that it has to be trucked away or piped away and injected deep underground or disposed of in some other manner. They can recycle it to some degree, but not 100%. And they can't reuse it, and so it's completely removed from the hydrological cycle. Well, I'd like to see some hydrologists, sitting in a university, figure out how does that impact, the rain patterns and so forth. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't have any impact, but I bet it does if you do it long enough and you use enough water. And then you're going in and you're drilling in areas. I know in Mexico, some of the maps that I've seen, you're talking about the desert there. You're talking about the desert Southwest in the United States. And that's going to have a significant impact on local communities, on the water tables of local communities. So how does that play out economically? I mean, at some point, cities can't thrive without water. So do you just wipe out an entire city? I know this is kind of theoretical, but I could see how it could happen in desert areas, where you just where there's no water left. Well,
air?
they can't do anything with the contaminated water. They have to inject it underground. At least in this area, that's what they do. They inject it underground, and it's completely removed. You'll never be able to use that water again unless someone comes up with some brilliant technology.
Clean that water.
Yeah, it's so contaminated. It's not only contaminated with drilling compounds and chemicals, but it's also contaminated with radioactive material that comes from deep in the formation. So you've got kind of a double whammy there. You've got chemicals, very toxic chemicals, and you've got radioactivity. That's a problem, and I don't see the technology popping up to, reclaim that water anytime soon. So that water's gone. We've been doing work recently on externalities, like the pollution. What is the pollution costing? What are the road damages? The road damages are my favorite, because who's going to pay for that? Well, you and I, whoever lives in the local communities. That burden is going to fall upon the taxpayers. And I have a real problem with that, because that's privatizing profits but socializing the costs. And these companies should be made to pay the entire costs of whatever their activity is, and that's not happening. Use the U.S., would be my advice, use the U.S. and the work that's been done here as a cautionary tale. Look at there are reports out there now on actual production history from every shale well in the U.S., and you will see they're not long-lived, and they are not producing what they promised they would produce. They're not producing the revenues they promised they would produce. There is plenty of information here in the U.S., and I would encourage you to use that and look at it very dispassionately, because that's what's heading your way. There are a lot of promises made up front, but they haven't come true here.